Hey there, and welcome back. Today, I've got 3 horror stories with a family twist that'll have you thinking twice about those holiday reunions and old childhood homes. Before we get started, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from? Tell us in the comments below. And if you enjoy these spooky tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more haunting stories. Let's get right into it. I never understood why my mother hated reunions so much until the year she finally agreed to host one at our ancestral home on Willow Creek. It was supposed to be a joyous gathering, a chance for distant relatives and generations of our sprawling family tree to meet. Instead, it became the stuff of nightmares. I was the one who found the old invitations in a dusty trunk in the attic. My mother, Meredith, had told me time and again never to go poking around up there. But curiosity got the better of me. I pried open a heavy cedar chest and discovered a stack of cream-colored envelopes, each sealed with a wax crest, a willow tree etched into a circular design. It matched the same crest on our front gate. The invitations were dated nearly a century ago, addressed to relatives I'd never heard of, some in states I didn't even know we had family in. I showed them to my mother, expecting her to laugh or at least show a flicker of interest. Instead, her face went pale. She snatched them from my hands, slammed the trunk shut, and told me, "Don't touch anything else up here, ever." A week later, she surprised me by announcing that we'd host the next family reunion. "I think it's time," she said, voice tight. "Time we reconnect with everyone and put some things to rest." That last phrase sent a shiver through me, but I chalked it up to her usual dramatic turns of phrase. By late June, relatives began showing up in droves. Great Aunt Nancy from Texas, the Halifax cousins from up north, distant uncles from Florida. The house bustled with chatter, kids running through hallways, older folks reminiscing under the shady willow trees out back. My mother plastered on a polite smile, but I knew she was uneasy. She jumped at every knock on the door. I busied myself playing hostess. The old house, much larger than I ever realized, had 9 bedrooms, endless corridors, and an attic that spanned half its footprint. The property bordered Willow Creek, a slow-moving tributary that fed into the region's bigger rivers. Everyone commented on how picturesque it was. They took pictures, told ghost stories around the fire pit. It felt almost normal. But at night I couldn't sleep. Unsettling noises echoed through the walls, scraping, thumping, as though something in the house kept shifting. I told my mother, but she brushed it off. Old houses have old bones. They creak and settle. On the second evening, an elderly relative I barely knew cornered me in the parlor. Her name was Beatrice, and she was a cousin 3 times removed or something equally obscure. I'd just poured myself some lemonade when she grasped my wrist with startling strength. "You've been in the attic," she whispered. It wasn't a question. Her watery gray eyes pinned me in place. Yeah," I stammered. "That's my house, after all." Beatrice's grip tightened. "There are letters up there," she said, voice trembling. "Letters that should never see the light of day. You mustn't read them. Promise me." I tried to pull away, uneasy and confused. "I didn't see any letters, just invitations." She shook her head sharply. "I know what I'm talking about. If you find them, burn them. Don't let the words take root." Her urgency scared me. I mumbled something about not going into the attic anymore, and she released me. The rest of the night, I couldn't shake her warning from my mind. A day later, I caved to my curiosity. With everyone busy chatting on the lawn, I snuck upstairs to the attic. This time, I didn't open the trunk with the invitations. Instead, I dug deeper into piles of old furniture and boxes. Finally, in a corner behind an antique vanity, I found a stack of letters bound by twine. They were fragile, their paper yellowed and brittle. I carefully opened the first. It was dated 1923, addressed from Mother to my dearest Mer. My heart raced. Mer? Could that be short for Meredith? But my mother wasn't alive in 1923. I read on. "You must never speak of what we did under the willow tree, Mer. The creek demands its due, and we have offered it our family. Each generation will feed it, or the water will rise and take all of us." I felt a chill so deep my hands shook. What on earth did that mean? The next letter was even more cryptic, mentioning rituals by moonlight. a family tradition that involved a sacrifice to keep the land appeased. My mind spun. Could these letters be part of some old superstition? Maybe it was just deranged ramblings from an ancestor, but the sense of dread clung to me like a wet blanket. I quickly replaced the letters and hurried downstairs. That night, the entire family gathered in the grand dining room for a lavish feast. My mother insisted on preparing a special stew that had been passed down for generations. People were buzzing with excitement, stories of old times, toasts to the future. I noticed that Cousin Beatrice was absent, but I was too busy playing hostess to go look for her. At midnight, thunder rumbled outside. A storm rolled in, sending everyone scurrying to bedrooms. I made my way through the dark hall, flashlight in hand, because the ancient wiring always flickered during heavy rain. As I passed by an open window, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard. I froze. By the willow tree near the creek, I saw two figures standing. One of them looked like my mother. The other, taller, was a man I didn't recognize. I stared, trying to make sense of it, when lightning struck again. The figures were gone. Instead of going to bed, I felt compelled to investigate. Maybe the storm was playing tricks on me, or maybe something truly strange was afoot. I went to the basement, suspecting that if there was any hidden family lore, I might find more clues there. The basement was massive, with stone walls and a dirt floor in some sections. The old well in the corner had long since dried up. I inched closer to it, following a faint dripping sound. My flashlight beam fell on a series of etchings on the wall, the same family crest, carved repeatedly in a circle, each with a single name beneath it. James, Adelaide, Winston, Catherine. Then I saw the most recent, Meredith. My stomach did a backflip. Under her name was a date, that very night's date. The next crest was blank, the name not yet carved. A wave of nausea hit me as I realized this wasn't just some art project. It felt like a record. Of what? I heard a scrape behind me. Spinning around, my flashlight revealed my mother standing at the bottom of the stairs, her face set in a grim expression. "What are you doing down here?" she asked coolly. I managed a tremulous reply. "Mom, what is all this? Why is your name carved on the wall with tonight's date?" She sighed, stepping forward. "I was hoping to handle this differently, but you forced my hand." My mother began explaining in a hushed voice. For centuries, our family had resided on this land. The creek was special, alive somehow. There was a pact made long ago to keep the waters from flooding and destroying everything. That pact demanded a life from each generation, offered willingly or by force. This offering took place during a family reunion, ensuring many witnesses and a continuity of the tradition. The carved names belonged to those who had been chosen or taken. I felt faint. "You're saying you have to sacrifice someone?" She nodded grimly. "Every generation. It's my turn. I've known this since I was a child. My mother was taken by the creek, as was her father before her." Tears burned my eyes. "But this is insane. We can't let this continue." She shook her head. "It's bigger than us. If we don't continue, the creek will rise. Our entire family, and probably half the county, would be swallowed. We have no choice." I wanted to scream that we did have a choice. We could flee, break the tradition, warn everyone. But my mother's eyes, they glowed with a resigned acceptance. She told me that after the storm peaked, she would go down to the willow tree. The water would take her, ending our branch of the line. Then it would pass to me, or whoever survived next time. We argued, tears streaming down my face. I refused to let her go. "Is that what you and that man were doing outside by the willow? Preparing for this ritual?" I demanded. She nodded, wincing. "He's the family's chosen witness. Each generation must have one, and we must gather one personal item from every family member to place by the tree. It ensures the sacrifice covers them all." I realized with horror that all of us had unwittingly offered something personal. A ring Aunt Nancy left on the windowsill, a toy a child dropped in the yard, a watch Uncle Robert forgot in the study. My mother had been collecting them. The stew earlier? She'd asked everyone to remove jewelry and wash their hands in a special basin. She was gathering items the entire night. Lightning flashed again, shaking the house. I grabbed her arm. "Mom, this is murder. I'm calling the police." She looked pained. "They can't help. It's the land itself, you'll see. If I don't do this, the water will come anyway, and more than one life will be lost." Outside, the storm reached a fever pitch. I ran upstairs, determined to stop her, to alert the family. But to my shock, everyone was already congregated by the windows, staring out at the willow tree swaying violently in the wind. A few had ventured onto the porch, ignoring the rain, drawn as though by an unseen force. And there was my mother, dressed in a white gown, walking barefoot across the sodden lawn. In her arms she carried the items she'd gathered, a heavy satchel, dripping water. The tall man from earlier stood by the creek, arms outstretched. I dashed outside, screaming for her to stop. My voice was lost in the thunder. The wind whipped my hair, the rain stung my eyes. I stumbled through the mud until I reached the tree where the creek churned angrily, rising higher by the second. She turned to me, her expression heartbreakingly calm. "I love you," she whispered. Then she stepped into the swirling water. The man beside her chanted something I couldn't decipher, a guttural repetition of words older than any language I knew. My mother kept walking, deeper into the creek. It defied logic. She was up to her waist, then her chest. I tried to grab her hand, but she shook me off gently, tears in her eyes. Finally, the water closed over her head. The thunder cracked. A wave of muddy water surged downstream. I feared it would wash us all away. Instead, the torrent receded almost as quickly as it had come. My mother was gone. The tall man vanished. In the sudden stillness, I heard only my ragged breathing. Dazed relatives emerged from the house, calling my mother's name. The sky began to clear, starlight reflecting on a calmer, quieter creek. I collapsed onto the mud, sobbing. No one else seemed to know exactly what had transpired, as though they'd been in a trance. The next morning, we found no sign of her body. Some said she must have drowned, and the current carried her away. Others whispered about curses and pacts. Most returned home, unsettled, but without real answers. Meanwhile, I kept the truth locked inside, uncertain how to move forward. I don't know if the ritual satisfied the land. I still have nightmares of the creek rising, returning to claim me. Sometimes I see that tall man's silhouette near the willow tree at dusk, as if waiting for the next name on the wall. All I do know is that my mother sacrificed herself believing it would protect us. And I fear that one day, the water will demand another life, mine or someone I love, because our family's debt is never truly paid. My husband and I bought the old colonial house at a steal. It had everything we wanted, a big yard for our daughter, Rose, and enough space to expand if we decided on a second child. I was 6 months pregnant when we moved in, so we were thrilled at the idea of setting up a new nursery in one of the upstairs rooms. We noticed oddities right away. The house smelled perpetually of lavender, though the previous owner insisted it had been vacant for years. Doors seemed to close on their own, especially upstairs. But we brushed it off. Old houses have quirks. Besides, I'd always dreamed of living in a home full of history. The second bedroom, our intended nursery, had peeling wallpaper with a pattern of faded teddy bears. It looked ancient. On our first walk-through, Rose, who was 4, clung to me and refused to enter that room. "Scary," she murmured. "Don't be silly," I said, but I admit I felt a prickle of unease. Within a week of moving in, Rose started talking about a new friend. She called him Charlie. At first, I assumed Charlie was an imaginary playmate, but then she started telling me details. Charlie was 5, he had blonde hair, and he liked to hide behind doors. The level of detail unnerved me, but I chalked it up to an active imagination. One morning, I found Rose whispering at the door to the nursery. "Shh, Charlie, Mama's coming," she said. I put a hand on her shoulder. "Are you talking to your friend?" She nodded vigorously. "He says the baby can't sleep here. It's his room." Goosebumps raced across my skin. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Well, we're going to fix this room up for the baby. Maybe Charlie can share?" Rose's face fell, eyes wide with concern. He doesn't want to share. He says the baby should stay away. A few days later, while my husband was at work, I decided to explore the attic. Something felt off about the house, and a part of me wanted an explanation. Maybe old photos or records that would show who lived here before. I climbed the rickety stairs to the attic, dust swirling in the sunlight. Trunks, crates, and boxes formed a maze. Eventually, I found a small chest labeled Charlie. Inside were baby clothes, a rattle, and a photograph of a young boy. He was perhaps 5 with blonde hair. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Charlie, 1972 to 1977, our little angel." My heart dropped. The boy had died at 5. Exactly the age Rose insisted her friend was. I dug deeper into the chest and found a newspaper clipping, a headline about a tragic accident. A child had died in that house. The article was vague, mentioning only a fall from the second-story window. Horrified, I turned to the next clipping, a follow-up that said foul play was suspected, though no one was charged. The mother had insisted it was an accident. I sank onto a crate, heart pounding. Rose wasn't making Charlie up. Or if she was, she'd coincidentally described a real child who had once lived and died here. I confronted my husband that night, showing him the photo. He was skeptical, but admitted it was strange. We decided maybe we'd pick a different room for the nursery, just in case. Still, part of me wanted to stand my ground. This was our house now. I wasn't about to let a ghost story dictate how we used it. But Rose grew more agitated by the day. She'd cry at night, insisting Charlie was angry. "He doesn't want the baby to come," she whined, tears streaming down her cheeks. I tried to calm her. "He's just a spirit, honey. He can't hurt us." But I wasn't sure I believed my own words. About a week later, my husband left on a business trip. It was just me, Rose, and my ever-growing belly. Storm clouds gathered that evening, and the wind rattled the windows. I put Rose to bed reading her favorite story, trying to ignore her fearful glances at the door. Once she dozed off, I padded down the hall, pausing at the nursery. The door was ajar. Without thinking, I gently pushed it open. A frigid draft hit me, though the window was closed. My breath caught when I saw a small shape scuttle behind the crib we'd set up. My heart hammered. "Hello?" I whispered. No answer. Just the hush of the house and the thunder outside. I clutched her, my heart racing. We retreated to my bedroom, locking the door. I dialed my husband, voice shaking, but the storm had knocked out the power and the cell signal was too weak. We spent a fitful night huddled together, every creak magnified 100-fold. In the morning, I called the local priest, explaining in a shaky voice that I needed a house blessing. He arrived with a small kit, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers in each room. When he reached the nursery, his voice faltered just for a second. Afterward, he took me aside. "There's a presence here. A spirit, possibly a child. Sometimes lost souls remain if they have unfinished business or strong attachments. It may be confused or angry." He recommended we remove the child's old belongings, store them elsewhere, or destroy them, and not let Rose spend time alone in the nursery. "Give the spirit a chance to move on," he said gently. "But if it persists, you might consider leaving." I wasn't ready to give up our dream home. I removed everything we'd placed in the nursery, deciding to keep the room empty for now. Meanwhile, Rose's behavior deteriorated. She barely slept, had frequent night terrors, and insisted Charlie was furious I'd tried to bless his room. I caught her talking to him in corners, sobbing, "Don't be mad, Charlie. Please don't hurt my mommy." One evening, I found Rose in the hallway staring at the nursery door, which stood wide open, despite my memory of locking it. She was talking in a soft, soothing tone, as though to calm a tantruming toddler. I carefully approached. "Rose?" She turned, tears glistening. "He's screaming," she whispered. "He says you took his mommy away." A jolt of sympathy coursed through me. If Charlie truly was a lost spirit, perhaps he was searching for his mother. Did she still live, or had she passed on? Maybe he believed I was trying to replace her with my own child. The night my labor started, a full moon cast eerie shadows through the windows. I was alone with Rose again. My husband's flight had been delayed by storms. I felt the first contractions around 11 p.m. Panic surged. I called my doctor, who said to come in if they got stronger. Meanwhile, I tried to keep calm, gathering a hospital bag, checking on Rose. Around midnight, Rose screamed from her room. I rushed in, doubled over with pain from another contraction. She was thrashing in bed, eyes wide with terror. "He's here!" she shrieked. "He's in my bed! Mommy, help!" Lightning flickered outside. I yanked the blanket back, searching for… what? The shape of a child? Nothing was visible, but Rose's fear was palpable. Then the bedroom door slammed. Lights flickered, and in a brief flash, I saw a small figure, blonde hair, old-fashioned pajamas, standing by the dresser. His face twisted with rage and sorrow. I clutched Rose, tears spilling over. "Charlie, please," I whispered into the darkness. "I'm sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry you lost your mother. But I'm not her. I can't replace her." The figure flickered as lightning revealed him again. He raised a small hand, reaching out, but not to me, toward Rose, or maybe the baby inside me. Another contraction rolled through me like a tidal wave, and I gasped. Rose sobbed, hiding her face in my neck. Summoning courage, I croaked, "You have to let us go. We won't use your room. We'll leave it. But you can't stay here hurting us. It's time to find your family, your real family, wherever they might be." Thunder boomed. For a moment, the temperature plunged. I heard a child sniffle as though he was crying. Then slowly the door reopened. The lights stabilized. The presence lifted, leaving only the smell of lavender behind. We moved out 2 weeks later. I gave birth to a healthy boy, James, the night of that storm. We stayed in a small rental while my husband put the colonial up for sale. I felt a pang of guilt, abandoning the old house, and possibly the spirit who remained there. But my children's safety mattered more. Sometimes I wonder if Charlie finally found peace, or if the next family who moves in will hear small footsteps in the nursery at night. I still dream of him occasionally, a lonely blonde boy standing by the crib, longing for his mother's embrace. And in those dreams, I swear I can smell lavender on the breeze. I grew up hearing that we came from a long line of gifted people. My grandmother used to say we had the sight, though it skipped generations. I never believed in such things, at least not until I inherited my grandmother's estate and discovered that some gifts are curses in disguise. Grandma Eloise passed when I was 26, leaving me her sprawling Victorian home on the outskirts of town. My parents had died in a car crash when I was young, so Grandma Eloise practically raised me. Despite loving her, I hated that house. Too many dark corners, too many creaking rooms. But it was mine now. In her will, she left a cryptic note. "My dearest child, the legacy falls to you. Guard it well, but do not let the shadows take root." I had no idea what she meant. The house was old and needed repairs, but I planned to move in temporarily and fix it up to sell. My fiancé, Lucas, warned me about potential money pits, but I felt obligated to at least sort through her belongings. So, we arrived with our suitcases and a sense of dread. From the first night, the house felt restless. It breathed with the wind, its rafters groaning. Around midnight, I heard a knock at my bedroom door. Thinking it was Lucas, I got up, only to find the hallway empty. Then the knocking resumed, this time from behind me. My breath caught. It sounded like it came from the closet door. I opened it, certain I'd find nothing. Instead, I saw a faint silhouette, human in shape, darker than the darkness around it. I froze, heart hammering. It vanished in an instant. Slamming the closet door, I flicked on every light I could find. Lucas, awakened by my panicked screams, found me hyperventilating on the floor. I tried to explain what I saw, but he blamed it on grief and stress. "It's been a long day," he said gently, soothing me until I fell asleep. The next morning, I rummaged through Grandma Eloise's library, searching for answers. She had hundreds of dusty tomes on folklore, mysticism, and genealogies of our family. Eventually, I found a worn leather-bound family Bible, a ledger tracking births, marriages, and deaths going back centuries. Symbols were scrawled in the margins, strange runes I couldn't decipher. One entry caught my eye. Eloise, 1930, gifted sight, overcame the shadow. Next in line, blank space. Under it, Someone had penned these words in red ink. "The shadow will seek the next with sight." My heart pounded. Was Grandma Eloise referencing some kind of inherited ability? And if so, did that mean I was next? The memory of that dark silhouette in the closet sent a chill through me. I confided everything to Lucas, my grandmother's old legends, the silhouette, the warning in the ledger. He listened, brow furrowed, but remained skeptical. "I think your grandmother's interest in the occult might have rubbed off on you," he said. "There's no shadow haunting you. The house is just old and creepy." His words stung, but I couldn't blame him for doubting. I wasn't entirely sure I believed it either. Yet, as days passed, the presence in the house grew more pronounced. Doors opened when no one touched them, footsteps echoed behind me, and sometimes at night, I heard a soft voice calling my name. While exploring the second-floor hallway, I found a door I'd never noticed before. Its knob was locked, the wood carved with odd, swirling patterns. Determined to uncover every secret, I searched for a key among Grandma's things. Inside a jewelry box, I found a small brass key with a matching swirl design. It fit perfectly. The door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a tiny room with a single rocking chair facing a mirror. On a small table beside the chair lay a black scrying bowl, like the kind used for occult practices. My skin prickled. The mirror's surface looked warped, as though reflecting shadows rather than light. I inched forward, glimpsing my own wavering reflection. Then behind me, the silhouette appeared again. I whipped around. Nothing was there. The rocking chair began to sway on its own. Fear roiled in my gut. I fled, locking the door behind me. That night, I dreamt of my grandmother. She stood in the locked room, mirror shining with an unearthly glow. In the dream, she placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "The shadow hunts the gifted. It wants the sight for itself. You must not give in." When I woke, I felt compelled to revisit the family Bible. I pored over each page until I reached a hidden compartment in the ledger's back cover. Inside was a single slip of paper. "The shadow feeds on doubt and fear. To banish it, one must face it in the place of reflection. Only the chosen can see it fully. Only the chosen can cast it out." I realized the place of reflection must be that mirror room. My gut twisted at the thought of confronting whatever lurked there. But Grandma Eloise's words haunted me. If I didn't stop it, would the shadow continue to torment me, and maybe future generations? Strange things intensified. Lucas woke with scratches on his arm, as though a small hand had clawed him. Doors banged throughout the night. Our cat hissed at corners, fur standing on end, and I kept seeing glimpses of that silhouette, always at the edge of my vision. Lucas finally started to believe something was wrong. He suggested we call in a paranormal investigator or simply sell the house and leave. But a stubborn part of me felt I had a responsibility. Grandma Eloise left this to me for a reason. If I fled, who else might the shadow hurt? I decided to face the shadow in the locked room. Lucas insisted on coming with me, though I worried about his safety. We armed ourselves with flashlights, placed a few protective charms I found in Grandma's library around our necks, and waited until midnight. The hour Grandma's notes suggested the veil might be thinnest. At 11:58 p.m., we climbed the stairs. The hallway felt colder than before, and the door to the locked room stood ajar, though I was sure I'd locked it. A low whisper seemed to emanate from inside, as if the house itself was breathing. Lucas squeezed my hand. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded, more certain than I'd ever been. We stepped in. The mirror loomed large, reflecting the rocking chair, and us. At first, everything was still. Then, as the clock struck midnight, the reflection shifted. The silhouette materialized in the mirror, gliding forward until it stood behind me in the glass. Lucas gasped. I gathered my courage and spoke to it. "I know who you are. You're the shadow that hunts my family, stealing the sight. I won't let you haunt us anymore." The silhouette rippled. A voice, barely audible, hissed, "You can't stop me." It was neither male nor female, old nor young, but it crackled with a venomous, ancient echo. My heart pounded like a drum. You feed on fear and doubt, but I'm not afraid. I have my family behind me. I am the chosen one now, and I reject you. Its shape wavered, flickering from the glass into the room itself. The temperature plunged. The rocking chair slammed back and forth. Lucas aimed his flashlight, but the beam seemed to pass through the shadow without effect. I recalled the instructions. One must face it in the place of reflection. The scrying bowl on the table caught my eye. With trembling hands, I picked up the bowl and filled it from a small flask of water I brought, chanting a protection spell I'd found in Grandma's notes. The water's surface shimmered. I peered into it, seeing the silhouette glaring back at me. My vision blurred, head spinning, as if the shadow was trying to pull me in. Despite the dizzying force, I pushed forward, focusing on every ounce of resolve. "Go back to the darkness," I commanded, voice quaking. "Release my family!" The mirror cracked, a spiderweb of lines spreading across the glass. The shadow shrieked, a horrific sound that rattled my teeth. Lucas gasped, nearly doubling over from the pressure in the air. The scrying bowl vibrated in my hands, water sloshing over the rim. And then, in a flash of blinding light, the mirror shattered completely. The rocking chair toppled over. The silhouette erupted into a swirling vortex of inky black, then collapsed in on itself, disappearing like smoke into a vacuum. Silence followed, so profound it made my ears ring. Lucas and I stood there panting. The reflection in the shards of glass showed only us. No trace of the shadow. A sense of deep exhaustion washed over me, but also relief. In the weeks that followed, the house's atmosphere changed. No more footsteps at night, no more knocking from unseen hands. It felt warmer, lighter. I repaired the broken mirror room, eventually repurposing it as a small reading nook. Lucas teased that we should keep a normal mirror in there, just to be safe. I continued studying Grandma Eloise's notes, learning about the gifted sight that apparently ran in our bloodline. Perhaps I had it. Perhaps I simply had the willpower to confront the shadow. Either way, I chose to stay in the house. Lucas and I got married in the garden that spring, under the same oak tree where my grandmother used to read her books. We even started a family of our own eventually. 2 children, neither of whom has shown any sign of that ominous shadow. Sometimes, though, on stormy nights, I feel a chill breeze in the hallway and wonder if the shadow is truly gone or just biding its time. But then I recall my grandmother's final words, trusting me to break the cycle. I did, and I refused to let it come back.